koutou. Welcome to this panel discussion on digital equity, and I picked a whakatauki to guide our thinking for today's session. The one that came to mind for me was he ika kai aki I raro, he rā paki aki I raro. So as a fish nibbles from below, so the ascent of a hill begins from the bottom. If I was going to translate it into te reo Pakeha, I'd think of that every long journey starts with a single step. So we're here today to start with a single step. It is just a single step, but hey, every step that we take gets us closer to where we want to go. I hope you've enjoyed the opportunity to meet some of the people here today. You've had the chance to have a kai and have something to drink. A reminder that sitting is the new smoking, so if at any point during the panel you want to hop up and go have something else to replenish your energy or lubricate your thinking, absolutely go ahead and do that. And a big thank you to Spark for hosting us here today and for organising the kai and the drinks that we've been enjoying. My name's Gabrielle Wall. I'll be emceeing our gig today. One of my, I think, virtues, my husband will potentially tell you differently, is that I'm a bit of a stickler for punctuality. So we will finish our discussion today, but you're very welcome to hang about afterwards for more discussion if you wish to. We're going to touch on a number of different areas of digital equity and digital inequity. We'll refer to the areas of the digital inclusion blueprint, so motivation, access, skills, trust. We're very lucky to have a range of different panel members here with us today. They come from a number of different organisations and a number of different perspectives. So I think we're going to kick off with hearing very briefly from each of you a short introduction. And as always, it's dangerous to sit to the left of the MC. So we'll start with you, Janai.
My name is Janai Yosipa, and in terms of my work, I have worked at Christchurch City Libraries for 12 years. For 6 of those years, I've delivered a lot of technology-based programs. And I suppose in terms of my background, both my parents are from Samoa, so they came in the 50s and 60s. And a big driver for them was, education as a vehicle to a better life. And so moving into the libraries, that's what I saw, it aligns with my values. But another thing is in terms of digital access, it's a really good place to start and a good equal ground for everyone to start. And through some really good managers, people like Danny, colleagues like Danny, they've seen that having minorities in the space, teaching and reflecting our communities has been really powerful, and so that's what I'd like to talk about today in terms of digital access.
Kia ora na koutou katoa, Nina toko ingoa. I akapapa back to Rarotonga, Matavira, on my mother's side, and Tomsburg, Norway, on my father's. I am first and foremost an artist who deals in Pacific identity. What does it look like to
You have more delicate mums than myself and Janelle, actually.
Do I have to start again, or do people hear me? Okay, starting off. Okay, so kia ora na koutou katoa, my name is Nina Oberg Humphreys. I am from Rarotonga, Matavira, in the Cook Islands, and Tomsburg in Norway. I am first and foremost a Pacific artist. I'm a multimedia artist that deals with what it looks like to be a second generation New Zealand born Cook Islander situated in Christchurch, so it's very much my experience. I have worked and still do in Christchurch City Libraries with Janai, and we together are part of Tangata Moa Trust.
That'll hurt your ears, but is it kia ora? Tēnā tātou katoa, he uri tēnei no tainui waka no whaengaroa hau engari tipu aki au I konei ki Ōtautahi raro I te maru o te haukangi konei ngai tuahuriri, ngai tahu whānui, he mihi ka tika ki a rātou. Ko Janelle Ricky Waka tōku ingoa, ko au tētahi o ngā puti puti te whānau o tātai ahorau, nā reira tēnā koutou. Kia ora everyone. My name is Janelle Ricky Waka, and I am
Gosh, which portai do I wear today? I'm a mum and I did a bit of that today. I'm a consultant. I work for a company called Core Education. I'm a kaiako, a trained primary and bilingual immersion kaiako, and I'm a pretty good cook. And that's me. Lovely to be here today. Ngā mihi.
Kia ora koutou. He uri ahau no tawhiti, no ingarani no kōtarana pōkutupuna. I tipu ake ahau ki te waihara keke, a kani ia ki taua whenua me ona uri. My ancestors are from Scotland and England, and I grew up in Blenheim, so I acknowledge iwi o te rohe, ngā tau. My name's Stephen McConaughey. I was a teacher for 12 years, something, not very good with numbers. I was a maths teacher, and I have now moved into consulting and research around all things digital, but with kind of the underlying kaupapa of digital equity, of really kind of digital done well, and by done well, I mean done well by the kids. So leadership development for digital leaders, kind of pedagogy, the art of how do we really make the most of this stuff. So that's what I'm here for.
Kia ora. Kia ora koutou. Called Gary Williams, tōku ingoa. I hail from Ōkuku in North Canterbury. My ancestors come from Scotland. They landed in Hawera in 1840 something, and I was born in Te Kauwhata. I'm currently an education manager with the Ministry of Education, and I started at education about 8 years ago, just after the earthquakes in 2011. Came in for one job, but found myself pretty quickly managing the transformation program that sort of was enabled by a whole bunch of new buildings that were popping up all over the place for the schooling sector. For the 25 years previous to that, I was designing and building golf courses. And somehow I've become the digital technology champion for Canterbury Chatham Islands, and it's completely fascinating. One of the things that struck me through the COVID lockdown, where we sort of had this notion that everyone was sort of tickety-boo and getting on with their learning, was clearly an equity issue around access to technology and all sorts of things for kids that were no longer able to go to school to pick up their learning. So a lot of that sort of thing drives me to think about different ways that we can create equity across the system so that kids can aspire to be the best that they can be.
Kia ora koutou, ko Danny tōku ingoa, mahi ai au ki te wānanga o Ōtautahi. I work for Christchurch City Libraries with the girls down the end there. Yeah, sort of my role in all of this in the libraries has been innovation, so trying to find innovative ways to excite people and engage people, particularly young people, and sort of digital type stuff. So I had quite a lot to do with implementing 3D printing and all that sort of thing within the library service, and that was done out at Te Hapua Library, where we sort of tested all that out and made it work with staff and stuff like that, and then rolled it out to teachers and students. Following that, it was about a 3-year process of thinking about what we might do for tūranga and working out what was best to have up there to sort of best support schools and local people. Digital equity is a big thing for libraries. Libraries all the way back were about getting people access to stuff, i.e. books, that only wealthy folk generally had access to. So nothing's changed, it's just digital now. So we work really hard to make sure that people are sort of getting access to that stuff. And we're doing a good job, I think. It's just getting it out there. Kia ora.
Thank you. And a little bit about me. I'm similar to many of you, wearing multiple hats. Here today wearing my portai as the General Manager of GCSN, which is the Greater Christchurch Schools Network. We're a charitable trust. We're involved in a number of different projects that address digital equity and the digital divide. We work generally with and within and through schools. Many of you will be familiar with my colleague Annika Fail, who unfortunately can't be here today. She is unwell. A mix of the things we do, we provide professional learning and development opportunities for teachers, for learners, for whānau. We're very heavily involved in internet access projects, including we've just concluded a Wi-Fi access pilot project in the geographic areas surrounding Ōtautahi Community Campus. So that's one of the Ministry's Equitable Digital Access for School pilot projects, and I'm hoping my colleague will talk about that shortly. We're currently working with Spark also around the Siena Jump for Students Fund, which is a project with Spark Foundation and Siena, which provides funded jump modems to students in a number of schools in lower socioeconomic areas. We're really just kicking off there, so that's really exciting for us. And we also take every opportunity that we can to advocate and to broker opportunities for individuals and organisations to connect in forums such as this. So I think we all know we're going to have a far bigger impact collectively than any of us will individually. So it's exciting that people can be here today, and I'm excited to hear the discussion. The format for today is really we're going to have a game of two halves. So you're going to hear a little bit from half of our panel, answer a few questions. I've got some I've prepared previously, largely because I'm interested in the answer to them, but I think they'll be valuable for you to hear also. Then we're going to watch a short video. At that point, you know, great time if you don't feel comfortable popping up during the speaking, great time to refresh your drink. And then after the video, we'll hear from the other half of our panel members. So, with that in mind, I'm going to invite one of my favourite people. You guys are all my favourites. But Gary Williams is particularly one of my favourites because Gary and the Ministry of Education are massive supporters of the Greater Christchurch Schools Network, which is not why he got the first spot. But I'm very pleased that you could join us today. And please, I'll hand over to you to tell the crew a bit more about your mahi.
Oh, right. Yeah, it took me a little bit of time to get my head around what I was going to actually talk about, but after a couple of those snacks up there, it becomes pretty easy. So I want to have a little bit of a chat about two dimensions of digital access, digital equity. One is around skills and the other is around access. So at a macro level in the ministry, we know that quite a few schools face challenges just in recruiting STEM teachers. So STEM is science, technology, engineering and maths. And some of our schools are really struggling to recruit, particularly with the pandemic that's just been. A lot of our recruitment is done from offshore, and that was just dried up. So in order to sort of help solve that particular problem, we've targeted some domestic initiatives that include some specialist recruitment and support through relocation grants to help teachers take up new roles. And this includes helping our schools actually hire people with those specialist skills in technology to be able to teach that through what we call the 3R National Fund payments. This is quite a new initiative, and since October we've approved about 14 of those, which gets people directly into teaching technology in secondary schools in particular. Since 2018, through the Teach First NZ program, we've had 20 graduates who have filled technology roles while they're still completing their teacher qualifications. That's quite a new thing for us to do. We're very good at making sure people have the appropriate qualifications before they go out teaching. But if you can't find teachers with appropriate qualifications, you've got to think about doing something differently. So what we're saying is you can teach, and we'll keep an eye on you, but you're getting your qualifications on the way. So that's been quite successful. And just as an example of that, since so far this year, over half of the 76 Teach NZ scholarships that we've awarded to secondary applicants, they've been offered to students who intend to teach technology in secondary schools. So that's quite an improvement in actually creating the skill set that we need for our kids to even get a foot in the door around digital technologies. We've got a massive work program over the next 4 years refreshing the New Zealand curriculum and Te Māoratanga Aotearoa, which includes updating not only the technology parts of the curriculum but science, mathematics and statistics as well. we provide a range of resources and support to help teachers deliver technology as part of a very rich curriculum. So, and that includes the support for digital technologies and Hangaro Matahiko curriculum changes which were introduced between 2017 and 2020, so that those learning areas are now compulsory in the curriculum. And that was quite a long time coming, and it's just delightful. We're hearing from our PLD providers in Canterbury in particular that schools have taken a really holistic approach to integrating digital technologies into the curriculum, sort of far beyond what was expected at this time, and certainly in comparison to some of the other regions who are still working through how that happens. And I think that's largely because of the collaborative effort between a lot of the players that are sitting around here, that teachers have been able to get the support to do that. In terms of access, everybody knows or should know that the COVID situation just sort of brought to the fore the inequity in the system when it comes to access to connectivity, access to devices, access to all the tools where you could actually do some learning online or even connect to the world through technology. And in 2020, the Ministry embarked on trying to connect student households across the country that were identified as not having an internet connection as best as we could. We allocated about 45,000 internet connections across the country. That was originally for 6 months from the time of that connection, but you know, COVID-19 is still a real risk. We know that the likelihood of an outbreak here is quite low, but it's not to say that it couldn't happen again. So we've extended that time frame until the end of this year. Those connections are free still. And off the back of that, because 45,000 connections represented about half the need, we had to take a look at some different ways of being able to manage that given the funding constraints. The budget envelope's pretty tight, and the actual solution is not sustainable. Most of those connections are little jump modems or what do you call them, the fixed wireless connections, which is not completely sustainable because as soon as one of those households moves, the connection to that household is lost. We've got to go through the whole process again of connecting them up if they move into another house without a connection. So we've been doing a bit of work with GCSN and with Enable and a few other people around the room here around looking at a regional response. We know that there's still about 1,700 student households across Greater Christchurch that are without a connection, and it occurs to us that a way more sustainable solution, given the proliferance of fibre in the community, is to connect all the households we possibly can to fibre, and recognising that the upfront costs of that fibre connection are the main barrier to households connecting to it. Somehow working with the Crown to be able to underwrite that, which then means that the marginal cost of collection to the household is just so much lower. I don't know if anyone's connected themselves to fibre recently. You've got fibre coming up to the door. Has anyone done that? Yep. I don't know, $139 a month for a plan. Yep. The best part of that money is going to the upfront cost of that connection. The plan you're actually paying for is only just in double digits. So if we could make that affordability, if we could crack that affordability barrier, particularly in social housing, recognising that perhaps 1,700 households that are not connected in Greater Christchurch, you would imagine that there's quite a few of those connections in social housing. We know that people in social housing tend to move more often than people who own their own homes or are in the private rental market. People in social housing have kids that go to school, and every time they move, at best, they're moving down the street and the kids can stay at the same school, but usually it means kids changing school as well, which is not a really good outcome either. So if we can have that connection, stability, forget about whether or not whether or not they've got a device at the moment, that comes a bit later. If we can get those connections sorted out, then we're on the road to breaking some of those barriers that just don't allow some of our priority communities to even access digital technology in the first place. So I'm excited about that project. We were supposed to have a meeting this morning, but one of our key players wasn't ready and another key player had lost her voice. So, and fortunately the catering that I ordered didn't happen, so we can postpone it till the week after next and get something done. That's probably my 5 minutes.
Terrific. Thank you, Gary. Appreciate that.
Good.
We're from my girl Janelle.
Oh, kia ora. No, I think I'll be alright. Might
go.
be too loud. It might be too loud with the microphone. Oh, kia ora, everyone. Gosh, so many thoughts running through my mind. I guess one of the things I'll say up front is, as a consultant, as a person actually probably, I intentionally like to cause people to feel a little uncomfortable. It's actually what I get out of bed in the morning and try to do every day. But through provocation. So some of the things I say might be quite provocative, and if they give you a wee wedgie moment and make you squirm in your chair, then I hope that that's what you remember when you take it away, when you go away from here today. And so I guess the lens that I would want to take is the one that I wear every day, which is as Māori. I live in Aotearoa and I'm a Māori woman, I'm a Māori mother, I'm a mother of Māori children. And what I would say about equity is, and I'm sure this is no surprise, Māori are very highly represented in all stats in equity, across the board, health, education, incarceration, the list goes on. And suffering inequity is really tough for anybody. It's doubly tough when you suffer inequity in your own home, where your people have lived for many hundreds of years. It is tough. And one of the things that we are in danger in the digital inequity space, or digital equity space, we're in danger of assuming, because digital technologies came to life post-colonisation, that design and innovation didn't exist previous to electricity. In fact, my ancestors were some of the most innovative people that we know. Seafarers, creators, they founded a country, they learned to live here, they navigated their way, they had their own measurement of time. So how might we create equity for Māori by Māori? Would be my big provocative question. We've got a very long history in Aotearoa of creating solutions on behalf of Māori, that we sit in a room with a whole bunch of non-Māori and chat about how we might make the lives of Māori better. And we come up with amazing solutions. Some of them absolutely work. Not all of them do. The biggest problem is that we don't have the very key stakeholders in the room to share their insights. And unfortunately, it's really hard for us to see outside of our own worldview. So we can only develop solutions based on what we know about the world, based on our own lived experiences. So digital inequity for Māori, actually all of our job is to empower Māori to develop their own solutions. And that is how we will start to see a difference in equity. There's actually a big inequity between things like English medium schools and Māori medium kura. So I've worked for a very long time. I'm a trained bilingual and immersion teacher. I was also the Māori medium national lead on Kia Takatua Matahipo. And what I can tell you is when you speak English, you have a variety of resources across the world, because English is a dominant language. If you don't speak English, you only have access to those resources developed in Te Reo Māori. When you are Māori, and whether it be an organisation, whether it be a student, whether it be a citizen of Aotearoa organisation, when most things don't look like you or sound like you, you can't see your face, you can't hear your voice, you weren't invited to the table when the discussions were happening, it can amplify the inequity, because you don't actually have a say in how we might solve equity challenges. So for our kura Māori, when we create resources for schools, when we put supports in places for schools, to have them all in English, to have them decided and chosen and developed and designed without Māori at the table, means we're actually, specifically whether we want to or not, we are explicitly choosing to exclude them. A whole sector of the education system, we're choosing to say, you're not important enough for us to make sure that we provide it in your language, for us to make sure that you are seated at the table, and for us to make sure that we do everything we can to support you to make your own decisions and solve those challenges for yourselves. Because how Māori would solve something for Māori might be very, very different to how others might. So this poses a challenge for all of us, because we all want to do something really great, but if we're not Māori, what's our role? Because we want to encourage everybody to get involved, and I guess what I would say, the role becomes that of an ally, a cheerleader, a support person, a guide, a champion. It's how can we empower Māori with the skills and expertise that they might need to navigate the challenges for their people, by Māori, for Māori. And equally, those of us in the business of serving any of our communities, the wero I guess I would pose to you is, how are you serving Māori? And take that away with you today, and how might we do that better? Because for far too long we have underserved tangata whenua of Aotearoa, and quite honestly, shame on all of us for that. You know, we have to repair some mamae and some trauma in our own home people, because if you can't see things Māori, hear things Māori, and feel things Māori in Aotearoa, where else will you? And many people have migrated to Aotearoa, and I believe it makes us a richer, more wonderful society. But often, in fact most often, their language, their culture and their identity is being cared for in their homes. They have it to go home to. If we don't look after things Māori in Aotearoa, New Zealand, then it's nowhere. It is nowhere for anybody to have. So how might we approach equity from a tiriti honouring perspective? As effective treaty partners, how might we do that? So that's my provocations. I've got plenty more, feel free. But I really want to challenge us to be thinking about this. And this hui today, and the fact that I was invited to be a panellist, is such a celebration of the beginning of such awesome mahi in that space. So I'm really humbled and privileged to be here, and equally happy to share my provocations and wero for all of us. So kia ora.
Kia koe, Janelle.
Kia ora.
Mōtou wero kia mātou.
Kia ora.
We'll try and fill those shoes, see what we can do. To kind of bridge a little bit about Janelle's provocations and a wee bit on the digital equity front, I had the pleasure of being an attendee at one of Janelle's sessions when we were during the COVID lockdown, so obviously it was done via Zoom. And Janelle did say she might try and give us a bit of a wedgie. And do you know, Janelle, I never told you this because we're on Zoom. The statistics are of the people here, someone's not wearing pants. So I'm pleased that we're all okay today.
Yeah, wedgies are a bit harder to achieve if you're on paintless, I guess.
That's right. So the beautiful digital technology are a marvellous thing, but we can see here everyone is wedgie capable, wedgie enabled, if you will.
And I think the wedgies, I always say wedgies come with love and an offer of support. So like, yeah, that might be uncomfortable, but hey, but I'm here to tautoko as well. And I would say most Māori are. We want more allies and more cheerleaders and more people in our waka to pick up a hoi. So yeah, they're loving wedgies, like wedgie hug.
I don't know that we need that in the trip. Thank you. On that note, Sam, that's going to be a tricky conversation to follow. Let's pass over to you and see where you can go from a wedgie hug.
Oh, okay. So yes, a bit about my mahi in this space. As I said, I'm really passionate about ensuring that digital stuff is used well. The reason why that's important is because digital equity is not just equity of access to a digital device or access to a digital connection. That's an essential part of it. But digital equity is also digital equity of opportunity. And when a student or when any person has access to a digital device or the internet, what do they do with that? And do they have the same opportunities as other people, as other demographics, as other groups in society? So my focus is education. I can relate to the multiple forte. I have my own business, Think e-learning, and I focus on leadership development for schools, digital leaders. I found I was in a leadership role in a school myself in digital area, and I can assure you it's quite an isolated position, and I know that I recognise a few faces here. I know you know what I'm talking about. And so it can be hard to know, well, I have students in my school who, you know, I know that they're facing inequitable outcomes and inequitable opportunities. What do we do about that? So that's a big part of what I try to do there is look at how do we make sure that the technology is used really well. I also have some work around, with Leadership Lab and with GCSN supporting schools in that area as well. But the other main thing that I'm supposed to be focusing on is my master's thesis this year. I mean, I'm definitely focusing on that and devoting all my time to that. So, yeah, my thesis research topic is, in a nutshell, how effective was the home learning TV channel that popped up during lockdown? So how worthwhile was it? Not comparing it to what would, you know, the education that the students would have had if they'd been in school, because it's a nonsense question. They didn't have school. So, but comparing it to if they had nothing. And so then digital equity is what that whole research is all about. The purpose for the home learning TV channel was providing access to educational experiences for the students that didn't have either a device at home or a connection at home. And it wasn't even just that, it was students who might have had an internet connection, they might have had a laptop in the house, but there were 3 kids and 2 parents all working from home. So it's not just as simple, as black and white as do they have one or do they not. It's really much more nuanced. And then what really surprised me was the statistics around students who couldn't even access the home learning TV channel. They didn't have access to a television and therefore needed hard packs to be sent out to them. So that's been kind of the focus of my work this year is both ends, I guess, upskilling the schools and especially the digital leaders, those in each school who are responsible for the digital stuff, and also doing that research around what actually happened during lockdown, how worthwhile was that TV channel, and what kind of lessons can we take from there in order to kind of address this digital equity stuff in a moving forward.
So I've got a few questions. As I said, some I prepared earlier. You guys will get a crack at asking some questions a wee bit later on, but I got to be MC, which means I get to go first. It's one of the benefits of the job. So I'll chuck these ones open to any of our panel to reply to. Pass the mic back and forward if you're not robust of lung. So the first question that I wanted to put to you was, we've got an audience from a big range of different backgrounds. So what are the examples or types of inequity that you guys are coming across in your mahi that actually some of our audience today might not be aware of or might not have come across or considered themselves?
Something that really surprised me that's come up in my research in the last couple of months is around again, that focus on it's not just digital equity of devices in their hand, but equity of opportunities once they have it. And the difference between disparity, I guess, between students coming from a high socioeconomic status area or lower socioeconomic status, the difference in their digital footprint. So it wasn't just about whether they had technology, it was, okay, they've got technology. The research really highlights a difference between students from a higher socioeconomic status that correlates with a positive digital footprint. So, I mean, digital footprint gets a bad rap. It's not just about, you know, don't share too much on social media. It's not about minimise and make it as small as possible for the good of your future. It's actually, you need to curate it. You know, there are benefits to it, and if you don't have one at all, there are disadvantages. So coming from that, higher socioeconomic status correlates with a positive digital footprint, which the research then says flows on to employability and access to other skills. It probably doesn't need to be said, but lower socioeconomic status correlates with a negative digital footprint, which has negative impact on their employability and kind of those other outcomes. So that really surprised me. I don't have a magic solution for it, but I think, to me, it really highlighted that there's more to it than just the just what we see. There's not just put a device in their hand. That's got to be the first step, and it's a massive piece of work that has to be done. And yeah, certainly kudos to those who are involved in that space. But once they've got that device, we need to be thinking also about how it's being used.
Janelle, you going to?
Yeah, I was just going to, I think I've already sort of spoken to the disparity and inequity that exists between our English medium and Māori medium and bilingual education in terms of access to resources and people with expertise that can speak Māori, right? So facilitators, kaiako, people that can speak Māori. And we already have to kind of leave our reo at the gate when we go to restaurants and the supermarket, and we ring up service people on the phone. So we don't want that to happen in spaces, particularly like education. So I guess that's one of them. But the other one I was going to raise is, so 100% total or just access to internet, access to devices. But I guess from a Māori world view, we're very much tribal people. So I don't do very much for myself. Everything's for the betterment of whānau iwi hapu community, you know. So we're used to sharing, we're used to, you know, roles and responsibilities. I clear the table, but somebody else sets it, and somebody does this, and that's their role within a whānau. So even if we were to improve the access for Māori akonga in their home in terms of internet and devices, we need to have a bigger conversation about skills for whānau and their awareness of how those devices work and how might we upskill the other members of their whānau so that they are not sitting alongside. We might have solved the equity issue for the akonga, but it still exists for the whānau. And that's a really important part of us going together as a whānau and feeling that our parents, our kaumātua and tuakana taina that live within the house are going together with their whānau. So it's a bigger discussion than just, I guess, equity and access will start the process, but then we've got to look wider than that, I think.
Any other panel members want to address that one? So, one of the things that we know about digital inequity is that actually who it affects and how it affects them isn't in itself equitable. It's one of sort of the great ironies there. What would be your suggestions about how our audience members, recognising that you guys come from a range of different contexts, how they can go about addressing digital inequity when they see it?
I guess from my perspective, or from my perspective in my role at the ministry, one of the biggest challenges we've got is, you know, working at a macro level. It's really hard to identify inequity at an individual level, and I mean that it goes with the whole notion of identifying the 80-odd thousand households that didn't have an internet connection in the first place post-COVID. It was a desktop exercise that was run by the three major telcos, and it was basically just testing whether or not there was a signal to a household, and that was it. So we couldn't make any assumptions around who was in those households, other than through a general prioritisation of those kids who were in addresses that were associated with decile 1 to 3 schools, who were sitting NCEA. They became our priority target. But that's making some assumptions as well. That's making the assumptions that actually the bulk of inequity sits in deciles 1 to 3. And we know that there are kids in decile 10 schools that don't have an internet connection in their household for a variety of reasons. The decile system is a really blunt instrument to do any sort of sensible analysis on around equity. So I guess for anyone who identifies inequity at an individual or whānau or community level, the key thing there is you've got some intelligence that other people need in order to make a difference, in order to think about what it is we're doing and maybe reprioritising some of the stuff we're doing, and also being able to have conversations with other people in the know about what's going on. So I think the key there is to let someone know about it. Does that sort of make sense?
And building on that, as Gary said, if you spot some inequity in the space in which you have influence, that means you have intelligence that other people need. But then to tautoko what Janelle was saying, you might have intelligence that other people need, but then who else needs to be at the table to have that conversation about what that solution might be? So as much as a mathematician, I would love to say, when you spot inequity, here's your first step and here's your algorithm, follow this formula. I think the first step has to be you need to get the right people in the room and listen to the people in the community, listen to the other voices that aren't necessarily in that that initial sphere that noticed it, I guess. So when you notice it, then look out, then invite people in, and see where the conversation goes from there, because you have intelligence that other people need, and they have intelligence and lived experiences that you need in order to kind of make any meaningful contribution.
Can I just add something really practical about giving some thought to this, not just in terms of digital inequity, but a whole bunch of things. There's some of us that have and some that have not, and I would consider myself, we're okay, my kids are okay, we're okay. So how do we mobilise those of us that have to, like if my internet provider said, hey, we've got this new deal, Janelle, pay an extra $5 a month and you can put internet to someone else's home. I'm signing up for that. In fact, I'd move provider for that. So how do we mobilise those of us that could throw an extra couple of bucks on our power or, those kinds of things? How do we get those conversations happening? Because there are a lot of us that can and will support initiatives like that. So I'd love to see some of that stuff happening. How do we mobilise those of us that are happy to support others in this space, financially, whatever that looks like?
All right, we'll consider that the end of our game of the first half of the game. So take just about 30 seconds.
Here we go, out at Rowley Kura, and these guys are just doing the a bit of editing. This is in preparation for our trip out to Antarctic Centre today, which is going to be cool. So they've caught some images that working with transitions and bits and pieces like that. No? Not transactions. Yeah, but it's going good. It's fun. And Wai and Fetu are giving them some good guidance there. Well, kinda.
Oh, you pressed next.
Let's go take one.
All good? So yeah, let's freestyle it, share what you can share, and what you know about it.
Ako sa iyo mga lang yung mga sana ito sa mga sana I want to start I'm years old. I love my teacher. My favorite part about this book is when the teacher notices the boy reading out loud really quick and she says that she's proud. Guys, remember to subscribe and like this video.
Talo Falaba, my name is MJ Tusa.
My name is Kisang, and we are from Ku, built up of 5 from Tikomono Valley School.
And we've created this video to share our perspective of the impact of climate change and what it's been doing to Antarctica and the Pacific Islands.
And recently, we took a trip to the Antarctic Center, and we gained a lot of useful knowledge.
The big problem with sea level rise is the water that comes off the ice is clear. Now these ones are okay because they can handle fresh water, but some of the fish that live in the sea, they won't be able to handle that fresh water, and the warming of the water too, they won't be able to breathe very well.
In Antarctica right now, global warming is causing all of the ice to melt, which means that all of the animals are losing their habitats. But they can't just move to another country because they won't adapt to the temperature. And if Antarctica melts right now, then we'll be losing all of our natural resources due to Antarctica being the Earth's cooling system.
This also affects the Pacific Islands. The sea levels are rising very dramatic and it causes the land to erode. This also affects our water and our crops and also takes away land from our villages. We are also starting to lose culture and tradition and our pride of who we are.
And if we lost our culture, it would be really sad because culture is the one thing that makes us different from the rest of the world, and it gives us a sense of independence and pride.
Rising of the seas affects where animals are going to live, how salty the water is, how warm that water is, and also the weather storms that they're going to get. So there's some really big effects on the islands because of sea level rise.
Our film crew is based up of 5 Pacifica people.
Out of that 5, 3 have never been back to their ancestral homeland, and we want to make sure we all visit in our lifetime.
So let's work together and try to save Antarctica
and protect our islands.
Danny, do you want to do a live, what we would be hearing?
Lots of screaming, lots of yelling, kids were pretty excited. Yeah, it's the buzz that makes it have its impact really, so that sounds quite important. But yeah, so basically, yeah, it's just one of those things that all these people that have never really got involved in any kind of sporting thing at all see a way forward with this, and it can actually sort of work. I mean, you can see whānau right there, just hanging out with their kids that previously were told that this was their kids being weird, they're in the basement playing games. This is actually something that gives them the same sort of equity to that sort of mana as any other kids. So.
We shall hand over to you. Of the mic. So thank you.
Okay, what do you want to know?
Just give us your best couple of minutes. That was fantastic to have those examples. I think that really, I mean, when I speak for me, that put a face to things.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I think the first video there is the one with Te Kumanoa Rowley School, and that's an example of what we're talking about in action. So rather than talking, it's a done thing. We've actually been out and done that, and it wasn't easy, was it, Janai?
No.
So those sorts of things are not ever going to be easy, but you've got to go to those communities, talk to those communities, find out what they want and what they need, listen to that, and help deliver. We're fortunate in libraries because we've got access to a great deal of venue, a great deal of sort of resource that we can put to these things, and it's just a matter of doing that, but we also need that support, which is why those bits and pieces were up there. How can we help, etc. We need business support, etc. So those sorts of things are great. The esports, on the other hand, that's a new piece of work, which is we're trying to turn esports into something that is like football or netball. There's Christchurch City Libraries have got lots of infrastructure that we can actually get kids into. So we can turn our learning centres with all these great PCs and all this great equipment into the football field for esports. That's the plan. So we've got all these different areas around town that we can do that in, and we're doing it. But it's not easy again, is it? It was difficult last year, it's probably going to be more difficult this year, and we lack funds. So I was hoping today that within the business communities that are here, they can see some of these projects and actually see if they want to get involved, because it's big. Those that do will probably find that it's actually really beneficial as well. yeah, that's kind of where we're at with that. And yeah, it's collaboration, it's working with people, it's listening to the communities, and it's sort of helping out in that regard.
Thank you. And if someone here does want to get involved, either with the esports or with the other initiatives, how should they go about doing that?
They can just give us, they can email me. I guess there's lots of, we've set up all these different networks that people can sort of tap into. And yeah, they can just do that, and I'll pass it on to Janai and take off.
Terrific, thank you. All right, shall we pass over to Nina and Janai?
Kia ora again, everybody. So Janai and I, although we work for libraries, we're here in a trust capacity, which is our organisation called Tangata Moana Trust. And essentially what we do is we create STEM experiences and opportunities, but through Pacific arts, language and culture, so that our people can feel more affirmed in their identity and their belonging, to then be able to even tap into those other worlds. So the STEM part is very much the byproduct of people getting cultural experience and knowledge as we lose our languages and lose our cultural traditions, and our people feel more displaced. So that's what we do other things, but we're here in this capacity. We currently have a beautiful project in partnership with Christchurch City Libraries, MOE, GCSN, Impact Ed, and people that funded us, Ministry of Pacific Peoples, creating a Pacifica Minecraft world. And we've been very fortunate to be brought onto this, and that's been very much through the relationships in which we have got through our jobs as librarians and library staff. And through this, we have been able to engage with beautiful children around what it is that makes them Pacific, and how it is that they can use their cultural identifiers and things that they need to know to build them up to then have technology outcomes. So for us, it goes, right, we might go to the gardens and look at plants, learn about plants, bring family in to learn about those plants, connect our family in, and then go, right, now we're going to need to regurgitate this with blockage. And then we have an archive of our traditions and our cultures. That's the big thing that we do, and I just wanted to say that really. Through that work, we really see, or I guess that our birthplace really came out of a place that was, by the time all our organisations and the people we work for get past their bureaucracy and levels of nods, we've already moved past, and the gap has become bigger. And so we really wanted to be in a place where we could be responsive and reactive and do things like, this is a family that has 7 kids and no device. Here you go, here is a device, and I will somehow make this happen for you, because that's instant change. And then, I don't know how to do my emails, I'm going to come to you and show you how to use your email. And that is very much about families. So, because if our parents don't know, then our kids don't know, and their kids don't know, and they can't ever see themselves in this digital world. It's hard to talk about digital equality or access when we don't have access and equality in lots of different ways. It's hard to talk about that when having a device or being on Facebook or something is secondary to what is on your table and being put into your belly. And that we get told that if we have good jobs, which is these areas of STEM in the future, that we will be better off, and that we don't feel connected to that because we don't see ourselves in these roles, or in these roles or anywhere in that sphere. So our job is very much, how do we make that part that gives us better jobs or better lives, successful lives, that are relevant to us and come from a real place of knowing, because just like Janelle said, our people have inherent knowledge that will solve world problems, and our kids and our families need to be connected to that and reminded of that, so that we can then change the world to be better. I've recently got a beautiful quote. If we cannot save Tuvalu, we cannot save the world. And that means that our Indigenous peoples are at the forefront of our conversations and in the roles of STEM, and they're listened to, and things change for us. Which means that we need people in these jobs, and also really surrounded by a lot of mana of their ancestors. And so that is really what that's our ultimate goal, isn't it? If we can tap anybody and say, hey, do you know that this all happened? And you know this and this and this, our ancestors created this. And then, oh, do you know that you could do this as a job, or this and that and this? We're just about creating those dots, and that to me is digital equality. That to me is equality on all levels, and all we need to do in doing that for us, as say, is fund people like us. Go to your communities, go to your communities, because all these people are there doing this work, and they know very much what it is that they need to do to change the circumstances of their people. And that means maybe going, here you go, here's some money, here you go, how do I give you a platform, here you go, instead of me saying I've got some solutions up here, the top down, that it is very much the ground saying I need help with my emails. They could go on for a long time, so I'll just pass it on.
Well, I'm just going to try and pull the threads together of both our trust and the libraries. Through the libraries, we've actually sort of created a blueprint of how to engage with our community, the Pacific community. When I first came into the libraries, and in any space that I go into, I'm trying to engage my people with where I am, especially in a place like the libraries where you have access to the whole world, you know, and information technology. So when I first got there, I was like, oh, where are my people? You know, and the first question is that we should be asking ourselves as organisations is, what diversity do you have in your staff to attract those people? If it wasn't for us as Pacific people, or people that have connections in the community, projects like the ones that we just showed before wouldn't happen. So if there's no diversity in the staff, that we're not going to address any inequity there. Another way that we as the libraries are introducing STEM as a possibility, even just a possibility of a career path to Pacific communities, is by taking the equipment out to our community spaces. So we go to places like Power Up, we go to our churches, where else? You know, places where our people are hanging out, and we're just like, oh, here's a 3D printer, here's some robots, here's an iPad. It started off at Aranu with iPad time, in 2012. That was the most popular thing, iPad time. Kids are not interested in that now. But it was just playing Fruit Ninja for a whole hour on the iPads. That was a fun thing then. But from, you know, we've come from iPads to now 3D printers, VR, the esports stuff. We're constantly trying to stay ahead of the game to make that stuff accessible to our wider community, our mainstream community, but also our minority communities. And we only can do that through our staff and our connections, our authentic engagement with our communities. Another way is now that we have given them the tasters, we have looked for funding or partnership opportunities with people like the Ministry of Pacific Peoples. We've also applied for Curious Mind funding through our partnership with University of Canterbury, and we have a program called Philosophy for STEM. And so we've gone from a taster level, we're now at Tier 2. We were going to start introducing, I think for this term, it starts next Monday at Tūranga. We will be doing engineering experiments based on magnets. We're going to create compasses, and they're going to talk loosely about our ancestors and navigation. But they'll start on this. This is year 8 to year 10 students. So they're going to be doing an engineering block. They're going to be working with Imagination Station and robotics. And then they'll finish with us in a graphic design unit where they're going to create t-shirts and I might give you no recipes or anything. But they're going to create something that reflects them, their identity, their culture. They're going to make t-shirts and pretty much anything they want with the technology up at Tūranga. I forgot to say before, I manage the top floor of Tūranga, Ōtautahi Creativity Floor, so that's how we're kind of creating access there too. But then moving into the trust, I found now that I'm in a management role, I can't deliver, and that's really what makes my heart sing, is being able to deliver to my people. So our current blueprint that Nina just spoke about is all from us creating access through the libraries. So this is a way that we're now transitioning into the next level where we can teach the breadth and depth of our culture through STEM. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, team, the time has come that it's over to you guys. So time for questions from you guys to either the panel as a whole or to any of our individual panel members.
Can I ask? We were really fortunate as a school. We're a low decile school in the centre of town. We were really fortunate. We did get a lot of devices, and and we've had lots of PLD through Impacted and things like that. And I think we did really well during COVID compared to what's happening in Wales and other places in the world. And but my question is, what do we do, because that gap is getting bigger in terms of, we were given 50 devices as a school. We've now just had obviously a load of students come from other schools who don't have devices and things. So what is sort of the plan? Because we've all got ideas and we all know, I guess, what that inequity is. But what is the big plan, or what do we think the plan is going to be about how we sort of, because there are no more teachers coming. That money that was given to schools for all those devices was great, but that gap sort of still exists now because we've got fresh students coming into schools and things. So just what people think about what we can do about that in terms of that gap hasn't really closed. It closed at the time and we responded really well and really quickly, but right now that gap's probably in some places actually getting bigger. I would say as a school we're actually experiencing now, compared to our other schools where they had the money within their families to sort of plug those gaps and we haven't, that gap's actually separating us even more from schools down the road. So just my thoughts, your thoughts on that really.
You're looking a lot at me. So the response during COVID in terms of access to devices was pretty fast moving, and we did what we could to plug some of the gap, recognising that the entire need was never going to be met. And that was for a range of reasons, one being the financial constraints that we operate under in terms of budget. But the second thing was the practical thing was around the supply of devices. We just couldn't get enough of them in, let alone have the time to configure them and get them out to schools. Your school did do particularly well. In terms of a grand plan going forward, there is one, but it's highly dependent on whether or not the Crown is going to fund additional devices, and it's highly dependent on whether or not those devices can actually be sourced. But there is a plan. We recognise that the demand for devices in schools can't really be met by the parent community in most cases. In some cases it can, and some schools have bring your own device policies which suits them very well. But there are a number of schools where that's never going to happen. The devices that went out the door during the lockdown, we made the decision that the school would end up owning those devices, and part of that decision rationale was around the fact that if we left them with students, given that the majority of them went to students sitting NCEA, it was highly likely they were going to be finishing school that year or the next year anyway, and we didn't really want the kids taking the devices with them and then sticking them in a cupboard somewhere and not being used. I do know there are some other initiatives around which we're quite supportive of, and we're talking to people about. So that's there's an outfit around at the moment that is repurposing devices. You can drop them off somewhere, and RAD. They're doing a great job, and are configuring devices that are particularly useful in a school setting. So there's hope for that. We've got conversations going on with some of our philanthropic partners, Rata Foundation being a very good example of people who actually get what the problem is and are looking at some of their funding structures around how we can partner up in making some inroads into that. I can't tell you much more in that because budget is not out until week after next, so we don't even know what the quantum's going to look like.
Right. Thank you, Gary. Additional questions?
I was just interested, I don't know who this is to, so I'll address it to the panel, but I was just interested in terms of what I heard was that success occurs when we centre our Akaranga Māori and our Pacifica learners. So I guess within the education sector, what's the long-term plan around centering of our Māori learners? Because that, to me, appears to be the thing that works. So I was just interested in terms of, I teach in adult education, so I was just interested in the high school context. What's the long-term plan around centering, I guess, the Māori and Pacifica voice in education, and that becomes the position from which we do education and teaching, rather than kind of catering to versus centering. So I was just interested. So I don't know who's addressed to, I'm addressing everybody.
It's all right, the kaupapa is we just look at them expectantly and then
so,
someone caves.
Does that make sense?
I think there's, it's he pātai whaihina, he pātai rangatira. Such a great pātai, and the fact that you asked it means you're probably further along in your journey personally, which is tēnā koe. So there's a couple of things we need to do. There's a growing movement in Aotearoa, not just in education, but certainly the conversations I've been a part of in education around decolonisation. And how we might decolonise our minds, our hearts, our systems, our processes, our kura, our workforce, so on and so forth. And decolonise doesn't have to be a bad word. It's simply, basically, you could reword it to be more inclusive. You know, it's around those things that have supported a norm to exist. How do we break those down? And I think that's what decolonisation is essentially about. There's a lot more to it. But once we start to shift our dominant worldview around what a norm is, we will start to see our students move to the centre and the forefront of those conversations. With their mana, with their wairua, with their reo, with their identity intact. And we are already seeing, and have seen for many, many years, a shift in terms of the pedagogical practice of teachers to be more student-led learning as opposed to teacher-directed learning. And we've been working on that within the sector for a long time. A massive growing movement, and one of the areas that I work directly in is I'm a Te Reo Waitangi and cultural competency consultant. That's probably my area of expertise. And I would say, hand on heart, I am absolutely inspired by the huge, huge numbers of teachers and leaders within the education sector who are fronting up to say, I need to do better. I just need to do better. I need to know better and do better. And that's massively inspiring. Arguably, I would say education actually leads all other sectors in that space, to be honest. And we're seeing a growing movement in the government sector now because of new mandated expectations in that sector as well. So, yeah, in essence, I think, and I think one of these two lovely ladies over here raised around, you know, getting people on staff. I think it might have been you, Janaya, and how your staff represents the cultural identity of Aotearoa New Zealand. I would love to see workforces do the work now to prepare themselves to be a place Māori want to work, to be a place Samoan whānau want to work. Because for far too long what we've asked them is to conform to the places that they work. I would argue it's time for our workplaces to prepare to welcome them with open arms, because you should be so lucky if someone brown chooses to go work at your work. You should be so lucky. So how are you going to prepare yourselves to nurture their language, culture and identity so that they do want to work there? I could write a thesis about this, I need to stop. I could talk for ages. But such a great part-time. Kia ora.
Right, thank you. Take one further question.
I'd just like to throw a couple of questions to the group, and firstly I've got to also own up to being a trustee of the GCSN, and I want to thank Gabriel for her work and actually organising this. I also want to just pay thanks to, of course, the Ministry of Education, Core Education and the library, as I do have contact there, but specifically, I also happen to be involved with the budget service, and of course we've been charged by the Ministry of Social Development for looking particularly after the CULD community, the culturally and linguistically diverse community, and particularly following the tragedy that we had on March 15th. But in particular, what's the comment on, and we do find that we're dealing with a wide range of individuals from the CULD community, and particularly refugee and immigrants. And it's this particular group that we're now seeing, some real issues that are starting to actually appear. And and I'm impressed with Janelle's comments, with the whānau bringing together the group. And I want to know, what's the response as far as this CULD community, the wider community, and revolving around refugees and immigrants for digital inclusion? I know the ministry is doing all its best, but it's an area that we've been surprised and we've actually been blown away as to how they're not really being catered for in the New Zealand environment.
Interesting provocation. A few different words being thrown here today. Would any of the panel like to comment on that one?
Yes. So it's not a circumstance, Murray, that we're unaware of. And in fact, a lot of work has been going on in the ministry through our refugee and migrant coordinator and at directors level with conversations with DIA, MSD, and a raft of other acronyms around how we might assist. One of the things that has materialised out of those conversations with the sector of themselves is the funding for community hubs. So we've entered into a range of different contracts with a bunch of different providers who are representative of the very people that you're talking about, who use our schooling infrastructure and the ministry offices to run community group hui around all things that are angst in the community, which includes digital technologies. So it's a start. It's not going to crack that nut in a hurry, but actually what we're finding is and Janelle's sort of hit the nail on the head before, by bringing the community together and having the community describe the problem for itself and then come up with the solutions for itself, and all we're doing is enabling those things to happen, is not a model that we're not unfamiliar with. In essence, that's my role. So the 8 years that I've been with the ministry, I've sort of got to put my hand in the air and actually say I haven't done much. But what I have done is enabled a hell of a lot of other people to do a lot of things, which is really cool. At last count, I think I've got, including the programs and projects that some of the people here have talked about today, I've got about 13 projects going on across Greater Christchurch that are directly contributing digital equity, access for opportunities, whether that be for priority groups like Māori, Pacifica, kids with additional learning needs and refugee and migrant communities, they're all happening. I guess the question and the challenge for us is how do you accelerate those sorts of things and how do you make more of it happen? The resources, just the resources that I have are not insignificant, but they're not infinite. So I have to, part of my role is making some judgments around where we invest in. And my particular bent, if you like, is making sure that Greater Christchurch and then Canterbury and Chatham Islands as a region get the very best of what we can. And if other regions can jump in and access part of that, or they can learn from that, that's fantastic. But my focus is on this region and the people within it. So a long-winded way to get round to hopefully answering part of your question. The rest of it, I don't know what the answer is because we're continuing those conversations with refugee and migrant community groups around, what are the problems that you're facing and what do you think the best solutions are that are going to work for you and how can we enable that to happen?
Thank you, Gary. And I'll take this opportunity to thank all of you guys for taking the time. I know you're all very busy, so I appreciate you taking the time to be with us here this afternoon. Thank you again to Spark for hosting us in this fantastic space and for putting on the kai and the drinks. Lubricated our thinking, I'm sure. And of course a big ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa to our panellists. So please join me in thanking our panellists.